Alright, so here's the video that I promised on how to get started on your homework. So the first thing you're going to want to do for your parallelograms homework is to write the 5 properties of parallelograms. So starting with opposite sides are parallel. Not only are they parallel, but opposite sides are congruent. Opposite angles are congruent. Consecutive angles are supplementary. And last but not least, diagonals bisect each other. So here are 5 properties that we're going to need to be able to apply in each problem. So now we're going to read the directions. It says solve each problem and then plug your answer into the box for the next problem. So this is the box that they're talking about. Each problem depends on your previous answer. And so then we get started with number 1. Each problem you have a parallelogram. So let's mark our properties of the parallelogram. Opposite sides are parallel. So we're going to mark these opposite sides parallel. They're also congruent. So we're going to mark the opposite sides congruent. Those opposite angles are congruent. So we're going to mark those opposite angles congruent. And last but not least, the diagonals bisect each other. So that half of the diagonal is congruent to that half, and this half of the diagonal is congruent to this half. Now, you might just want to mark the property that relates to the information that's given. We're obviously just given information about this diagonal, and so you don't have to mark your whole parallelogram each time, but I will. Now that that's marked, it should be clear to you that to set up our problem, we're going to say this part, equals this part. Because the diagonals bisect each other, it splits into 2 equal halves. So 4z plus 1 equals 13z minus 8. We're going to subtract 4z from both sides, and you'll get 1 equals 9z minus 8. Add 8 to both sides, and we get 9z equals 9. Divide by 9 on both sides. Z is finally by itself, and z equals 1. And so now we're going to take that 1 and plug it into the box right here. In this problem, we're asked to solve for A. Well, how am I going to solve for A? Well, we have a parallelogram, so we're going to mark our properties and see how to set up our problem. Either part equals part, or part plus part equals whole. So those opposite sides are congruent and parallel. I've marked that. Now we're marking these opposite angles congruent, and there's no diagonals drawn, so I don't need to worry about that. Now that we've marked those opposite angles, it should be clear to you that 3a minus 1 equals 134. Why? Because they're opposite angles, they're congruent, and congruent means their measures are equal. So we're going to solve for A. First step, add 1 to both sides. 3a equals 135. Then we need to divide both sides by 3. 135 divided by 3. 4 times equals 12. Carry down to 1. 3 goes into 15 5 times. Looks like A equals 45. And so we solve for A. Now we need to plug our answer into the box for the next question. Here, we put in 45. And then we start the process over again. It's a parallelogram, so we're going to mark those opposite sides parallel. We're going to mark them congruent. We're going to mark the opposite angles congruent. But this time, instead of just saying this angle is congruent to that angle, what I would like to do is apply what we talked about with the alternate interior angles. So that means this angle is congruent to that angle, and this one is congruent to that one. Now that our picture is all marked up, we can see that 9z equals 45. We're going to divide by 9 on both sides and figure out that z equals 5. Now we're going to take that 5 and we're going to plug it in to the box for the next problem. So we're going to put 5 right here and then get started. How do I get started? Well, first off, mark your properties. It's a parallelogram, so opposite sides are parallel. Opposite sides are congruent. Opposite angles are congruent. And our figure is completely marked. Again, you didn't have to mark the whole thing. We were obviously given sides. And so you might have just marked the property having to do with sides. And so this problem, we're going to set up part equals part. So 2k equals 5k minus 9. We're going to subtract 5k from both sides. And you get negative 3k equals negative 9. Divide by negative 3 on both sides. K, here the negatives cancel out. K equals 3. And then, of course, you would take that 3 and plug it in this box right here. I hope this helps you get started on your homework if you haven't done so already. The first 4 out of 11 problems have been done for you. And get the rest completed, and I will see you tomorrow. Adios.